I never believed in ghosts. Let me say that up front. I'm not the kind of person who watches horror movies and sleeps with the lights on. I don't read into coincidences, and I certainly don't think the dead have any business with the living. But something happened to me 3 months ago that I still can't explain, and honestly, I'm not sure I ever will. All I know is this: I moved into an apartment, and something in that apartment was already living there. It started simply enough. After years of cramped shared houses and inconsiderate roommates who left dishes in the sink for weeks, I finally had the money for a place of my own. Nothing extravagant, just a modest one-bedroom on the eastern edge of the city, tucked into a quiet neighborhood where the streets were lined with old oaks and the rent was still affordable. The building was vintage, probably built in the early 70s, and it wore its age openly. The hallway to my unit smelled like bleach layered over something damp and forgotten. Paint curled away from the walls in thin strips, and the carpet had been replaced so many times you could feel the uneven layers beneath your feet. But I didn't care. It was mine. The apartment itself had a certain warmth to it. Hardwood floors, a galley kitchen with just enough counter space, and a bedroom window that overlooked the tree-canopied street below. The afternoon light came in golden and soft, and when I first walked through, I remember thinking, this is exactly what I needed. A fresh start. A clean slate. The first night was what you'd expect. I spent hours wrestling with boxes, assembling a bookshelf that came with instructions clearly written by someone who hated humanity, and shoving furniture around until the layout felt right. By midnight, I was wrecked. I collapsed onto the mattress, which I'd thrown directly onto the floor because the bed frame was still in pieces, and stared up at the ceiling. The building talked to itself the way old buildings do. I could hear the muted rumble of traffic outside, the shuffle of footsteps from the unit above, and the occasional groan of pipes hidden somewhere deep in the walls. All normal, all expected, but underneath it all, there was something else. A faint, rhythmic sound. Soft, barely there, like the steady inhale and exhale of someone sleeping in the next room. I turned onto my side and pulled the blanket up. New place, new sounds, I told myself. You'll get used to it. And eventually, fatigue dragged me under. The following week passed without incident. I settled into a rhythm. Work during the day, quiet evenings at home. I found a decent coffee shop 2 blocks away, started jogging along the tree-lined streets in the mornings, and even exchanged pleasantries with a couple of neighbors. An elderly woman on the fourth floor named Mrs. Calloway who smelled like lavender, and a quiet young man across the hall who never made eye contact but always nodded politely. The building was calm. The neighborhood was peaceful. Everything was exactly what I had wanted, except for that sound. It hadn't gone away. Every night, once the apartment settled into stillness and the distractions of the day fell away, it returned. That soft, rhythmic pulse. Not loud enough to keep me awake, but persistent enough that once I noticed it, I couldn't stop listening. It was like a heartbeat buried in the walls, steady and patient and disturbingly organic. I started testing theories. One night I turned off the refrigerator. The sound continued. I closed all the windows and sealed the vents with tape. Still there. I even killed the power to the entire apartment. Standing in complete darkness with my phone flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the black. The pulse didn't stop. If anything, in the silence of a dead apartment, it was clearer than ever. That was the first time I felt genuinely uneasy. I told myself it was the plumbing. Maybe water was cycling through old pipes somewhere in the building. Maybe the heating system had some mechanical rhythm that resonated through the walls. But even as I assembled these explanations, they felt hollow. The sound was too soft, too even, too alive to be mechanical. The night everything changed started like any other. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, half watching something forgettable on my laptop propped against the backsplash. The apartment was warm, the lighting low, and for the first time in days I felt relaxed. Then I heard it. Closer than it had ever been. Not buried in the walls this time. Not muffled behind plaster and pipes. It was right behind me. A slow, measured breath, close enough that I almost expected to feel warmth on the back of my neck. I stopped chopping. The knife hovered above the cutting board, my knuckles white around the handle. I didn't turn around, not immediately. Some primal part of my brain, something older than logic, told me not to move. told me that whatever was behind me was waiting for exactly that. I stood there for 10, maybe 15 seconds, listening. The breathing continued, unhurried and calm, like whoever or whatever it was had all the time in the world. My own breath had turned shallow, my heart hammering so loud I was sure it was audible. Finally, slowly, I turned. The kitchen was empty. The hallway behind me was empty. The apartment was exactly as it had always been. But the sound had stopped. I set the knife down with trembling hands and stepped back from the counter. My eyes scanned every corner, every shadow. Nothing was out of place. Nothing had moved. And yet the air felt different, heavier somehow, as though the space itself had tightened around me. I grabbed my jacket and left the apartment. I didn't even turn off the stove. I just needed to be somewhere else. Somewhere that didn't feel like it was watching me. I spent the next hour sitting on a bench outside the building, scrolling through my phone without really seeing anything, trying to calm down. The evening air was cool against my skin, and gradually, the tightness in my chest loosened. I felt foolish. A grown adult, spooked by sounds in an old apartment. Ridiculous. But I didn't go back inside for another hour. The next day at work, during my lunch break, I started researching. Not the usual, why does my apartment make weird noises searches. This time, I went deeper. I searched for the building's address specifically, combing through local news archives and public records. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I found it. The article was from 2016, buried in the digital archive of a local newspaper. The headline was stark. Tenant found dead weeks after passing in East Side apartment. I read it twice, my sandwich forgotten on the desk beside me. A man named David Renner, 57 years old, had been found dead in his apartment after neighbors reported a persistent, foul smell seeping into the hallway. Building management had entered the unit and discovered his body in advanced decomposition. He had been dead for an estimated 3 to 4 weeks. No family had reported him missing. No friends had checked in. He had simply ceased to exist, and the world hadn't noticed. The article mentioned that a faulty ventilation system had contributed to the delayed discovery, circulating air from Renner's apartment through the building's ductwork. It also mentioned that the unit had been extensively cleaned and renovated before being relisted. It did not mention which unit David Renner had lived in. I sat there at my desk, staring at the screen, a slow realization creeping through me. The dates lined up. The building matched. The ventilation problems matched. And deep in my gut, in that same primal place that had told me not to turn around in the kitchen, I already knew the truth. I was living in David Renner's apartment. I went to the property management office the next morning before work. The woman behind the desk was middle-aged, efficient, and clearly uninterested in small talk. I gave her my unit number and asked about the apartment's history. She typed something, glanced at her screen, and her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. A tightening around the eyes. A brief hesitation before she spoke. "There was an incident," she said carefully. "Several years ago. A tenant passed away in that unit, but the apartment was fully remediated afterward. New flooring, new paint, updated ventilation. Everything was brought up to code." "Did he die in the bedroom?" I asked. She looked at me for a long moment, then said, "I'm not able to share those kinds of details." But the way she said it, the way her eyes flickered downward, told me everything I needed to know. That evening, I sat in the apartment with every light on, my laptop open on the kitchen table, reading everything I could find about David Renner. There wasn't much. He had worked as an accountant for a small firm that had since closed. No social media presence, no obituary beyond the standard death notice, no surviving family listed. He was, by all accounts, a man who had lived and died without leaving much of a mark on the world, except, apparently, on this apartment. As I sat there reading, the sound started again, that same measured, rhythmic breathing. But tonight, it was different. Tonight, it didn't feel random or ambient. It felt intentional, like something was trying to communicate, to make itself known. Not aggressively, not threateningly, just persistently. I closed the laptop and listened, really listened. And for the first time, instead of fear, I felt something closer to sadness. David Renner had died here alone. Nobody had come looking. Nobody had cared enough to notice his absence until the smell became impossible to ignore. And now, whatever fragment of him remained was trapped in these walls, breathing into the silence, hoping someone would finally hear. "David?" I said softly, testing the name on my lips. The sound didn't change. It didn't stop or get louder. It just continued steady and unchanging. But something in the room shifted. A subtle change in pressure, like the apartment had exhaled. Over the next few nights, I tried to coexist with it. I told myself that if this was David Renner, or some echo of him, he wasn't trying to hurt me. He was just there. A presence without a voice, a memory without a body. I even started talking to him sometimes, narrating my evening the way you might talk to a pet. "Making pasta tonight, David. Hope you don't mind garlic." That sounds insane. I know it does, but it helped. The fear that had been building for weeks started to recede, replaced by something gentler, an uneasy acceptance. But acceptance, I learned, doesn't last forever. It was a Thursday night, maybe 2 weeks after my visit to the management office. I had fallen asleep on the couch with the TV still on, some late-night talk show murmuring in the background. I woke suddenly, completely, the way you do when something pulls you out of sleep rather than letting you drift out naturally. My eyes snapped open, and I was immediately aware that the apartment felt wrong. The TV had turned off. The lights, which I had left on, were dark. Not a power outage. The clock on the microwave still glowed green in the kitchen. Someone, or something, had turned everything off. And the breathing was louder than I had ever heard it. Not subtle anymore. Not buried behind the walls. It filled the room, surrounding me, as if the apartment itself was inhaling and exhaling. The rhythm was faster now, more urgent, like a person in distress. I sat up slowly, my pulse slamming in my ears. The living room was dark, except for the faint green glow from the kitchen, which cast long, alien shadows across the floor. And there, in the hallway leading to the bedroom, I saw it again. A shape, a figure, darker than the darkness around it, standing motionless in the corridor. This time, I didn't freeze. Something in me had shifted over the past weeks. The fear was still there, coiling in my stomach, but it was tempered by something else. Determination, maybe, or exhaustion. I was tired of being afraid in my own home. I stood up from the couch and faced the figure directly. "David," I said. My voice was steady, steadier than I felt. "I know what happened to you. I know you died here. I know nobody came." The breathing sound hitched. Just for a moment, barely noticeable, but I caught it, like a catch in someone's throat. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I'm sorry nobody noticed. I'm sorry you were alone." The figure didn't move, but the breathing began to slow, the frantic pace settling back into that familiar, steady rhythm. And then, something I hadn't expected. The figure raised one hand, slowly, and pointed. Not at me, past me. Toward the wall behind the couch. I turned, following the direction of its gesture. There was nothing there. Just the wall, painted a neutral, off-white bare except for a small crack near the baseboard that I had never bothered to fix. When I turned back, the figure was gone. The next morning, I pulled the couch away from the wall. The crack near the baseboard was larger than I had realized, running along the edge where the wall met the floor. I crouched down, running my fingers along it, and felt a slight give. The baseboard was loose. I pried it away carefully. Behind it, wedged into the gap between the wall and the subfloor, was a small envelope, yellowed with age, sealed shut. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. A letter, written in neat, careful handwriting. "To whoever finds this, my name is David Renner. I have lived in this apartment for 11 years. I have no family left and no one who will miss me. I'm writing this because I am afraid that when I die, no one will know that I was ever here. I don't want to be forgotten. I want someone to know that I existed, that I lived in this space, that I mattered, even if only to myself. If you are reading this, please remember me. That is all I ask. Remember that I was here." I sat on the floor for a long time, holding that letter, reading it over and over. The apartment was silent around me, completely, utterly silent. No breathing, no pulse, no presence lurking in the walls, just stillness. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. Then I called my landlord and gave 30 days' notice. It's been 3 months since I left that apartment. I moved to a newer building across town, one with thin walls and noisy neighbors and all the mundane annoyances of modern living. I haven't heard any strange sounds. I haven't seen any figures in doorways. Life has returned to what most people would call normal. But I kept David Renner's letter. It sits in the top drawer of my nightstand, and some nights before I turn off the light, I take it out and read it. Not because I need to, because I promised. I did some more research after I moved out. I found that David Renner had been buried in a municipal cemetery on the north side of the city. No headstone, just a small metal marker with his name and dates. I visited once, stood in front of that marker for a while, and told him that someone had found his letter. That someone remembered. The wind picked up as I turned to leave, rustling through the grass in a way that almost sounded like breathing. I told myself it was just the wind. I'm still telling myself that, but here's the thing that I haven't told anyone else. The thing that keeps me up some nights, staring at the ceiling in my new apartment, listening to the silence. The night before I moved out, after I'd found the letter and packed up my things, I did one final walkthrough of the empty apartment. No furniture, no belongings, just bare floors and blank walls. I stood in the bedroom doorway one last time and I whispered, "I found it, David. I'll remember you." And from somewhere deep in the walls, so faint I might have imagined it, I heard a single word: stay. I didn't stay. I walked out and I never went back. But sometimes, late at night, when my new apartment falls into that heavy, expectant silence, I swear I can hear it again. Not the breathing this time, just that one word, soft and distant, carried on air that shouldn't be moving. Stay. And every time I hear it, the voice sounds a little closer.